Hello, welcome back. This is week 3 of the Mind Mend series on eradicating addiction. I'm Dr. Christy O'Connor, your host and the creator of this content. So before we get started, if you have been unable at this point to really hone in on a time interval that feels attainable for you in terms of the duration that you're going between use, go ahead and stop here and go back to the first and/or second lecture and make sure that you really have this honed in before proceeding forward. We're going to use this as sort of an anchor point, so it's important that you have a set interval that you know that you can stick to at least 75 to 80% of the time. So if that's not something that has happened for you yet, it's no problem. Just go back and wait to proceed forward until that feels relatively stable for you. So this week we are going to get into aligning to positivity using discipline. So what I'm talking about here is using your mind, your willpower, your choice to align to things that promote and encourage positivity instead of things that promote and encourage negativity. And as usual, we're going to start by going over the symptom management, and then we'll get into some of the curative treatments for the wounding component. So for symptom management this week, the first thing that I want you to do / prep yourself for is you are going to pick one day that you are not going to use at all. And if you're already going multiple days, like say your time interval is 2 days, I want you to add another day to that. Or the other option would be to engage in a setting or activity or something that typically requires you to use. So maybe this is going out to a bar or going to a concert, or even if it's something solo, like going into a creative process or listening to music, something that typically you pair with using, I want you to engage in while not using. So again, you're going to pick one whole day that you're not going to use, or you're going to tack a whole day onto your pre-existing interval, or you're going to engage in an evening or event or something that typically requires you to use without using. So that's going to be step 1. You're going to pick that. Now, after you do this, I want you to take 2 full days and just go back to your preset interval, the one that you set from last week. So you're going to go your day or 3 days or whatever it is without using, and then the 2 days after this, you're just going to go back to the interval that you set for yourself from our previous work here. The third thing that we're going to do is you're going to pick a day after this 2-day sort of recovery period from the day or instance of abstinence, and you're going to use as much as you want. So you're going to, if the behavior is smoking, you smoke as many cigarettes as you want, knock yourself out. If it's drinking, I hate to say this, but I think it's important, knock yourself out. If you need to start drinking, from the minute you wake up, then that's what you need to do. So, also, I want you to try to set yourself up for success in this sort of planned relapse. Okay. So what I mean by that is, let's say your drug of choice is alcohol. Try to set yourself up so that you're not driving, so that you've warned your spouse. Maybe you take the day to be away from any kids or commitments or whatever that you have. Try to set yourself up so that you don't create a problem for yourself down the road in this day of prescribed use. Okay. So that's really important. Do the best you can to implement the harm reduction component of this behavior by being real about what kinds of things and problems you typically run into when you use, and setting yourself up so that you don't get things like DUIs and divorces, etc. So again, after your day or instance of abstinence, whatever, you take your 2 days that you've gone back, at least 2, that you've gone back to your pre-prescribed intervals, and then you take a day where you use as much as you want. Okay, so you can do whatever. Now, after this, you're gonna take at least a day go back to your preset interval that you determined in week 2. Okay, and then the third part of this, the third thing that we're going to do a little bit differently is you're going to take one day where you're going to stretch out the interval by a little bit of time, whether that's 30 minutes or an hour or 6 hours or whatever you think is appropriate. So one day of no use, one day where you use whatever you want, and one day where you're stretching out the interval. And ideally, you're taking 2 days in between the day that you don't use and the day that you use, where you're going back to the prescribed interval that you set in the second week. And ideally, you're taking at least 1 or 2 days between the day that you use heavily and the day where you're stretching out the interval a little bit. So this part can take a little bit longer. If you fail, particularly on the day that you're not going to use or the event that you go to where you're not using or whatever, I want you to try again. And I want you to try up to 3 times. And if you're unable to be successful with this after 3 times, it's okay. Move on, keep going as if you had been successful. So give it up to 3 tries. If you don't get it, just go ahead and complete the other 2 components of the exercise for this portion and move on. So you're going to also, as you go through this, be documenting how you're feeling physically, emotionally, mentally. And I want you to do that with particular attention on the day that you don't use, okay, for the first part of the exercise. And then the day that you do use, and the day after you use. So those are the 3 time periods where ideally your journaling may be a little bit more than normal. So we really want to pay attention to those 3 things when we're in a state of deprivation, so not having access to the addiction, and then when we're in a state of excess or complete allowance of the target behavior addiction, and then after, how we're feeling physically, emotionally, mentally after. So be writing these things down as often as you can for those 3 time periods. It's important to start really understanding what these 3 states feel like. So try to be pretty diligent about that. What you're going to also want to pay attention to is how you're combating craving when it comes up. So particularly on the day that you are not using, and then also the day where you're stretching out the interval a little bit more, really pay attention to what strategy you're relying on most in order to get through craving. You'll remember from the first lecture, we have distraction, there's confrontation, and then there's using thought to kind of think your way away from the craving. That's not to say that there aren't other coping strategies, but whatever you're using, be aware of that. Maybe jot it down. Try to really try to bring awareness to what strategy you're using most frequently. That'll help you currently and then later on as well. Other things to look for. So if this hasn't already started happening for you, it probably will relatively soon. There will be periods of time in your abstaining intervals, whether they're the set intervals or, maybe it happens on the day that you're abstinent, maybe it's kind of random, but there will start to be some intervals where you aren't using and you haven't used for, a period of time and you don't experience craving. That's going to start happening. Now, it may not last. It may. There are some people that they sort of get struck sober, if you will, and the craving leaves and they just never have a desire to engage in the behavior again. And that is certainly not outside of the realm of possibilities. However, for most of us, and for at least some of these addictive outlets that we have to start somewhere. And where that somewhere is usually is sort of these shorter periods of feeling like, wow, I don't crave anything. I don't need anything. I actually feel really balanced. I feel really good. Now, this can last anywhere from minutes to hours. And it'll probably get to a point of lasting for days in the near future, but it will start out small. And I want you to, when you start experiencing these chunks of time, just bathe in them. Just appreciate them and bathe in them, and know that that is going to be the state that you inhabit all the time when you've put in the practice and the work and the commitment to engaging in this process for yourself. So as those start popping forward, take the time to really be in them and feel them and appreciate them, because that's what you're moving towards, and they're going to become more and more frequent until there'll come a time where that's where you spend the majority of your time, and these sort of like cravings or agitations, what have you, will those instances will get smaller and smaller, and the amount of time you spend in this sort of free space will increase as we go on here. So the other thing to pay attention to is look for a growing ability in yourself to not give in to impulsivity. So as you practice this, you're going to get better and better at not giving in to this sort of hunger or craving or impulsive need to engage in certain behaviors. You're going to get better at pulling back from that and not doing anything with it. So notice when you're able to do that. And then notice also if there's a feeling of gratification that comes with that is in fact actually better than engaging in the behavior, than giving into the impulsivity, than giving into the desire or want or whatever. So be watchful for that as well. Also, I want you to become more aware of when you're able to engage in responsibilities or behaviors or anything really that you know you should do but you really don't want to do. Notice when you're able to kind of do that anyway. So maybe this is like getting out of bed in the morning. Maybe this is working out. Maybe this is taking your kids to some, after school function or some sporting event on the weekend or something. Things that you do because you know that you need to do them. And so you sort of scrounge up the energy, the ability to do it anyway, even though you don't really feel like it. I want you to be on the lookout for that. And I also want you to be on the lookout for instances where you refrain from doing something that you know would cause harm to yourself or someone else. So we're already kind of doing this, right, with our with the managing of the target addiction symptom behavior. We're already engaged in this process, but look for other things, whether it's committing infidelity or lying to your spouse or telling your boss to fuck off or whatever. Notice when you're able to not do things that you want to do or that you feel sort of compelled to do in this impulsive way. What you're picking out here, what you're starting to notice is your innate ability to use your willpower to do things that you don't necessarily want to do, or not to do things that maybe you feel compelled to do or want to do, but that you know will be harmful. We all have this ability. We all have this muscle. So it's just a matter of strengthening it. And most of us are already working it on some level without even realizing it. It's just bringing awareness to those ways that you are already exercising this muscle so that then you can take that skill and apply it to what we're doing here, or anything that you want for that matter. So I want you to become increasingly aware of those scenarios where you are implementing your power of choice of willpower to do something other than maybe what your biology or brain tells you that you want to do. So, and then for the maintenance part of this week, I want you to continue sitting in the mornings, ideally 5 to 10 minutes. And after your period of silence, you need to continue reflecting on how you're feeling before, during, and after use. Particularly, I want you to be focused on what it is you are trying to avoid or run from. So the addiction is being used to medicate something, right? So we're focusing on what it is you're trying to medicate, and then also how effective is the addiction or behavior in medicating what you're identifying here as what you're trying to get away from. And then third, how much time do you get of relief after you engage in the addiction or the behavior? So we're really trying to pay attention to, what am I medicating? How effective is the medicine or addiction? And how long do I get relief from? So 5 to 10 minutes of contemplation, of sitting in silence, and then take, another 5 to 10 minutes for contemplation after this, and really focusing in on those things. I also want you to continue taking time in the evening to reflect on how successful you were in meeting the objectives for the day, whatever those may be. Maybe you just had a day where you were just sticking to the time intervals that you previously set for yourself. How well did you adhere to that? Did you make it the full amount of time between use, or did you mess up, and why did you mess up? Or was it your day of abstinence and you were unable to hold it? Where were you at with these things? So gauge how successful you were, and if you were successful, really allow yourself to validate and provide, self-praise for that, because it's not a small thing. Every day that you're able to meet the goal that you set for yourself is a big deal. So allow yourself to sit in that for a little while. If you're unsuccessful, try to identify where the barriers are and see if there's anything you can do to make it easier to attain. So maybe something predictable keeps happening. Like, I keep having this interaction with this person at work, and then it triggers the use, or something like that. So maybe there's a way you can either interact with that person differently at work, or try to position yourself so that you don't get into that sort of altercation with that person or whatever. There's always a way to sort of navigate how to create more of a threshold for yourself in terms of sitting with these cravings and these things that come up, because that's really what it is, and then of course life comes in and throws all these different things at us, and our ability to hold the craving, the emotions that come with the withdrawal, all these things get smaller and smaller and smaller, and that's when we mess up. So what you're looking for here is, if you failed, how do you adjust things in your life to make it more possible for you to succeed? So take a moment to do that. You take a moment to thank yourself, whether you were successful or not, and appreciate the importance of trying, and understand that that really is the name of the game. Whether you're successful every single day isn't really relevant, but whether or not you keep trying is. If you keep trying, you're not going to fail. If you stop trying, you're much more likely to fail. So understand the importance of this. Thank yourself for continuing to try, and move on from the failure. I also want you to really look at your commitment level and see where you're at with things. Maybe you're doing really well and you're gung-ho about this, and everything is more or less going according to plan, with the exception of a few minor hiccups or something like this. And that's great. If that's the case, then, carry on. If you're feeling questionable in terms of your commitment, which, by the way, is a very normal way to feel about this, if not now, then at some point, this sort of feeling of like, why did I commit to this again? What am I doing? Why do I even try? Maybe you're failing a lot and you're like, I don't even know why I'm attempting to do this for myself. This seems stupid. I'm not doing well, whatever. If this is where you are, maybe take a moment and look at the alternative. There's a reason you started listening to these lectures, and there's a reason that you started stepping into this work. And the reason is typically because the alternative to doing so is actually more miserable than doing this work. It's hard to see that when you come up against these thick walls of resistance, and you're in craving and you're in withdrawal and you're all these things. And so, it's really difficult to see that. But the other option is go back to it. Go back to how you were doing things before. Go back and engage in the substance or behavior or whatever it is you're trying to eradicate here, and go back to whatever you were doing with it. That is an option. But usually once people get to a place where they're engaging in this work to fix that kind of problem, it's caused a substantial amount of pain or unfortunate circumstance in the person's life. So if you're wavering on your commitment level, absolutely go back into the option of continuing to engage in the use. And if that feels like a better option, it may actually be better to go and do that and then re-engage with this content when you feel a little bit more ready, because otherwise you might just end up working against yourself. It's like kind of, smacking your head against a concrete wall. Like, you may get a chip out of it at some point, but it's pretty counterproductive. So if you honestly feel that way, it may be worth considering walking that through to the end. So, and if you're like, no, I don't want to do that, then perhaps you can use that feeling to increase your commitment level to this process for yourself. So, and then also you're going to continue to implement the positive change that we identified from last week. So whatever that was, whether it was, drinking the cup of water in the morning before hitting the coffee, or, reading a book before bed, whatever it was, we're going to continue to implement that in the day-to-day moving forward too. And I want you to, all of these maintenance things, the sitting in the morning and contemplating, the reflection on how successful you were in the evening, and the implementation of the positive change. I want you to keep doing all these things regardless of what you're doing with your intervals. So I want that to continue on the day that you're not using, the day that you use as much as you want to, the day where you're stretching out the interval, all the days in between. Try to keep those things consistent. So we're trying to create the foundation here. So it is important that you're able to engage with these things with regularity for the most part. So that's the component for the symptom management for this week. Now we're going to go into the exercises to deal with the wounding pattern. So the first thing that I want you to do here is I want you to take a moment, take probably at least 30 minutes for yourself to really do this. And this is a journaling exercise. You are going to have to write a few things down. Again, you don't need to write a book, but it's important to see these things in front of you. So choose a time where you have at least 30 minutes to give to this. And at some point throughout this week, I want you to look at your current narratives or belief systems surrounding addiction. So examples of this would be, and these were narratives that I was gifted or grew up in, like once an addict, always an addict. Or, there's some kind of mental defect that causes the symptom that we're absolutely powerless to do anything about. So I'm going to have to sit in craving or whatever for the rest of my life and fight that. So these are examples of narratives that I went into adulthood with surrounding addiction. And write all these down. Maybe there's only a few. Maybe they involve stereotypes of people with addiction, including yourself. Or maybe you're kind of on the fringe of identifying as an addict, but you have a lot of judgment for people that, it's like an example of this would be like, well, I may drink too much on the weekends, but I don't use opiates or something like that. Like, identify any judgments, any pre-existing stereotypes, biases that you have towards these behaviors or people that carry these behaviors, including yourself. Because the truth is, the way that you judge other people surrounding this is the way that you judge yourself. So we need to get really clear on what narrative is spinning in our head regarding these symptoms, because there are ways that we can sort of avoid doing our own work by projecting these things onto other people. So write all of these things down, all of the narratives in your head about what it means to be an addict, or what it means to have an addiction problem, or what it means to sort of be stuck in this cycle. And also maybe what your beliefs are surrounding the prognosis of the thing. So what your beliefs are surrounding the ability for one to actually get better from these things. So once you have these written out, I want you to look at them, read through them, take a moment to use one or two adjectives, one or two describing words for each thing that you wrote down. Write down how that makes you feel. So maybe, we'll use the once an addict, always an addict as an example. Maybe this makes you feel hopeless. Maybe this makes you feel angry. You're like, I don't really want to identify as an addict my entire life, but here I am, very much addicted to a number of different things, or whatever the story is. So write these things down. How do these narratives make you feel about yourself, about the symptoms that you're carrying, about other people that carry these symptoms, all of that? So write it out. Now, either write below where you just documented all this, or to the side of it, whatever. You can have 2 columns, doesn't matter. I want you to, for everything that you wrote down concerning your current narrative or belief systems around these things, I want you to come up with a narrative that directly opposes or counteracts what you just wrote down. So again, with the once an addict, always an addict catchphrase, maybe the alternative for that is, I actually think that people, including myself, are capable of working through whatever causes that, and that they're capable of being functional, contributing people who don't have to deal with craving, and who don't have to continue identifying that way, and who can look back on a very challenging time in their life and feel proud that they were able to walk through that with grace and dignity, or whatever. That was pretty long-winded, but you get the idea. So for every one of those beliefs or narratives that you had something to say about your sort of gifted narratives and beliefs, write down what the opposite would be. Okay, so you should have the same number. It can be anything you want. You can get creative with this. There are a lot of ways to counteract narratives. So whatever you feel is the opposite of what you wrote, write it down. Read through those, and then again, use a couple of words to describe how it makes you feel if you settle in to that narrative, to that belief system, and write it down. Write it down next to the new beliefs, if you will, or the alternative beliefs, or whatever. And notice the difference between those two. Just notice them. And the purpose of this is to start examining how we look at things like this, and how we can shift the belief system and the narratives in ourselves. Because one of the biggest problems with addiction is the societal narrative surrounding addiction, and also the narrative in the medical community can be really daunting. There are a lot of physicians that operate under the assumption of, someone who has addiction is going to deal with this for the rest of their lives, or they need to be on Suboxone for the rest of their lives, which is the medication we use to treat opioid disorder, or cover it up rather. A lot of times, they don't believe that addicts can get better. They don't believe that people that carry this symptom are capable of becoming outstanding citizens. And this is a big problem, and it directly contributes to the reason that there is only a 10% success rate in the current treatment model. 10%. I don't know anyone who would pay what we pay to go to inpatient and outpatient treatment centers with a 10% success rate. It's insane. So in order to shift this, a big part of this is this sort of expectation of society and the medical community that people that carry addiction problems are going to fail. It is a lie. It is not true. And the more you start to understand that in yourself, the more your belief system is going to change. And then the even cooler part about this is, once you really understand that for yourself, you get to go out in the world and be a walking example of how untrue this stuff is. You get to go out and just be a living testament of what a crock of shit these narratives are. It does require, obviously doing the hard work, and you don't, get to bypass anything necessarily, but these narratives that there's just no path forward for people that carry these symptoms are just absolutely not true. So there are very big reasons to shift this narrative for your own healing, for your personal healing, for your own personal way out of these tendencies, but also also as that contributes to our collective ability to move past them too. So there's this sort of personal benefit / responsibility component, and then that obviously contributes to the greater whole. So a lot of reasons to shift these beliefs as you move forward in this process. So really take some time to dig into this first part of this exercise, because a lot of us carry a lot of really negative and untrue beliefs surrounding this particular manifestation of very human wounding. So, all right, so now for the second part of this exercise, of this wound healing, we are going to choose one area of misalignment. So you can choose, obviously engaging in addictive behavior is an area of misalignment for most of us. One of those things we're like, I'm not going to do this, and we do it. So you can choose to focus on that if you would like to, seeing as though we're already doing it. It's kind of a gimme, and that's fine. So you can choose that, or you can choose another area of misalignment. Maybe it has nothing to do with the symptom of addiction per se. Maybe it's, I don't want to yell at my kids anymore. Or maybe it's, I don't want to lose my temper with my husband anymore. Or maybe it's, I need to stop lying to my boss about, why I was late, or X, Y, and Z, or whatever. So you can choose something that you regularly engage in that you don't feel very good about. And that's really what I'm referring to when I'm talking about an area of misalignment. Talking about something that you engage in that you don't feel very good about. So you're going to identify one area where you do this, either the addiction that we're working on or something else, something like the examples I just gave you. And I want you to write out what it is, so what you chose, and then how it makes you feel when you engage in the act of misalignment. How does it make you feel when you yell at your kids? How does it make you feel when you lie to your boss? How does it, whatever you chose, write down how it makes you feel. Now, directly below this, I want you to write out some steps that you can take in order to move away from engaging in the behavior. And there may be a tendency here to say, well, it's simple. I just don't yell at my kids anymore, or I just stop lying to my boss, or and that's true enough. But typically with areas of misalignment, with these actions that we sometimes give into and that we don't feel very good about, typically there's some kind of stepping stone in between where we are in the cessation of engaging in that we need to take into practice. Because if most of the time, if we could just turn these things off, we would. And so if we were capable of just not yelling at our kids anymore and not losing our temper, or not fighting with the same thing over and over again with our spouse, or not whatever, typically if we were capable of that, we would just do it. So right below what you just wrote about the area of misalignment and how it makes you feel, I want you to write out some things that you can do to start moving away from that behavior. So now, if you chose your addiction that you're working on, you can list all of the things that we're currently doing. So you can list setting the time intervals, you can list sitting with cravings, you can list the journaling exercises. I'm kind of spoon feeding you this here, but like all of these things that we're doing, list them. All of these stepping stone things. And this will be helpful for you to actually see it. So if that's what you chose, write these things out. And then if that's not what you chose, if you chose something different, like let's take the yelling at your kids, for instance. So if you're saying, I don't want to yell at my kids anymore, it makes me feel terrible when I lose my patience with them. So what are some stepping stones that you can create that feel attainable to you? That is the other thing. Make sure you're choosing things that you actually feel like you can do, again, because we don't want to set ourselves up for failure here. But maybe it's things like, if I feel like yelling at my kids, I'm going to commit to keeping my mouth shut and taking 10 breaths before I do anything. Once I feel my temper getting to that point, I'm going to do nothing with that and take 10 breaths before I engage with them. And I don't care if they're screaming. I don't care if they're taunting me. I don't care how big of an asshole they're being. Like, I'm just going to take a moment to breathe and center before I engage them. So maybe that's a step you can take. Or, depending on how old your kids are, perhaps you can actually physically remove yourself for, whatever time you deem necessary. I mean, there's different things that are appropriate based on different ages for this example. So, again, tailor these stepping stones based on what will work for you and what is attainable. So there's a lot of things that you can do between yelling at them and never yelling at them that will get you closer to never yelling at them. So you really want to start identifying where you can set these stepping stones for yourself. So you're going to identify the area of misalignment. You're going to write out how this makes you feel. You're going to write out some stepping stones that are going to move you away from the behavior that you just identified, the area of misalignment. The last thing here is you're going to start implementing the stepping stones and watch what happens. So, again, with the kids example, you're going to start, maybe it's, I'm going to take 10 deep breaths and not engage when I start to feel frustrated. Start doing that and notice how it changes things. And maybe at the beginning, it doesn't change things. You're like, you know what? I tried to center, I took 10 deep breaths and I still yelled at them. That's okay. It's probably still, regardless of whether the outcome changes immediately or not in terms of the external manifestation of it, i.e. yelling at your kids, there's something that will start shifting internally because you're taking a step in a different direction. So start noticing that. Start noticing what changes as you implement these different stepping stones. And give this a little bit of time, but the better you are at implementing these things, the faster you're going to see the change in the external manifestation of the area of misalignment. So, the first step would be to, make sure you're tagging yourself when you're, the example for the yelling at the kids would be you feel your temper rising. You got to tag that first because you got to know when to implement the stepping stone. So you feel yourself getting angry, you show up late for work and you feel yourself making excuses for yourself or about to tell a lie to your boss or whatever. Catch yourself in that and then implement the stepping stone, whatever it is that you've prescribed for yourself. So start doing that and start noticing how that changes the dynamic of whatever is happening in the outside world with this. And then once you start doing this and you are able to see some palpable changes, I want you to ideally write it down, and if nothing else, just notice internally how this makes you feel. Notice the difference in how you feel when you are able to implement the stepping stone instead of going directly into the behavior of misalignment. So when you're able to pause when you're frustrated, or maybe you just tell your boss the truth, which is like, I couldn't get out of bed and I made it here late and I'm going to do my best to do better, or whatever it is, notice how it feels to start stepping into integrity and effort in terms of combating these misalignments versus just slipping into the misalignment itself. And try to write this down next to your stepping stones, how implementing them makes you feel. How does it make you feel as a person? Does it make you feel hopeful? Does it make you feel proud of yourself? Does it help you to understand that you are capable of moving away from certain things? Whatever it is, write it down next to those things. And then you can start looking at how, on paper, at how it looks to engage in the behavior of misalignment versus how it feels to start implement the stepping stones away from that. And typically that'll produce a pretty clear path, in terms of which way feels better to go. So can be helpful to refer back to that if you start slipping back into things. And on that note, just remember too, it does take at least 90 days for this development of new neural pathways, of new habits or whatever, to fully set in. So basically what that means is that making these kinds of changes is going to require a conscious effort. It's going to require energy for at least 3 months of doing it consistently before it becomes automatically, before it's one of those things, before it's the pathway that your brain just takes automatically. So this is what I mean when we're taking our willpower and our ability to choose, and we're choosing to engage in the stepping stones instead of the areas of misalignment. We're choosing to wait the allotted interval between use. We're choosing to interact differently with people that we've had problematic interactions with or whatever. And when we choose this, and when we choose it for long enough, eventually it becomes automatic and it stops becoming something that requires energy. But in order to get to that point, we have to expend energy to create the new neural pathway. It's kind of like if you're on a trail system that's been really well established and a lot of people have walked on it. It's not hard to stay on the trail. It's pretty clear. It's right there. You don't have to think about it. It's just there's one way. If you're making a trail and it doesn't yet exist or whatever, you got to cut down all the trees. You know, you have to move all the barriers. You have to make the path. And so the process of making the path neurologically, so to speak, takes approximately 3 months of consistent, energy requiring change, moving away from certain things and towards others. So, and this is why it's important to not try to, do too many things at once, because you only have so much energy. And so we have to kind of point it at the things that we're needing to change first, or really just focus on the things that are right in front of you in the moment. So be patient with yourself and know that this takes a while. And once you become aware, say, of like what the stepping stones are, that you need to move away from an addictive behavior or substance use pattern or something like that. Once you become aware of that and you start creating clear ways to start moving away from that, it gets much easier and it requires less energy, because you'll feel the craving or your temper or whatever start to build up, and you'll think, I know what to do with this because I created the stepping stones. And you'll move in that direction more and more often instead of the impulsivity or the behavior of misalignment or what have you. So this will get easier, but we have to create the path first. Also, when you start to feel aligned, so maybe you have, for the most part, been able to identify stepping stones that make the yelling at the kids much more infrequent than it used to be. And you notice this, and maybe it happens pretty quickly. So when you, and every time that you're able to not yell at your kids, every time that you're able to do something different, you feel good about that. You feel aligned. You feel proud that you made the effort and identified these things that you can do to move away from that. I want you to really take the time to, again, appreciate and absorb those moments. They are a direct consequence of your efforts, and they are well earned, and they're really important. So take the time to notice when you are aligned. Take the time to notice when you are falling into behaviors of integrity and patience and kindness instead of into anger and impulsivity and pleasure and all of these things. So as those start to surface, really take the time to appreciate them. The other thing is, expect a tremendous amount of resistance, especially in the beginning. What you are going up against with a lot of this stuff is, and a lot of behavioral health specialists, psychiatrists, they're the default mode network of your brain. Basically the factory settings, if you will, comprised of many different things, the conditioning by our parents, the conditioning by society, the way that we were taught to think and talk about ourselves in our heads, this narrative about what kind of person you are and what you are and aren't capable of, these things. You're going up against this default mode network of thinking that is largely negative. And it is the factory setting, if you will. So when you are doing things like creating stepping stones or, adhering to intervals between use of a substance or something else, it is going to feel all wrong. It is going to feel all wrong because you are going directly against the factory settings. You are telling your brain, I'm doing something different. We need to reprogram this thing. And your brain is going, nope, this is what we have and this is what we need to keep doing. And so you are going to, for physiological, emotional, and energetic reasons, come up against a lot of resistance in the beginning until you become relatively proficient at the skill. And even after you've developed proficiency, you'll find new ways that your brain wants to resist what you're trying to do. So just expect this and know that when you experience resistance, it's normal. And also know that in the beginning, you just can't trust how you feel. Unfortunately, you can't, because you're going to feel agitation because you're withdrawing. You're going to feel agitation because we don't like change and you're trying to implement something different. You're going to feel agitation because what you're trying to do goes directly against this factory setting in your brain that we come here with that's negative and very difficult to be with. This is why the sitting in silence is really important. What we're really teaching you to do is to be with and become aware of what's going on in this default mode network of thought. And for most, if not all of us, what's going on with that are not things that are fun to be with. They are things that are largely negative towards ourselves and other people. They include beliefs like, I'll never get better, I can't do this, I'll never amount to anything, things that are tremendously self-limiting. So, and you may say to yourself, well, then why do I want to sit with these things? Because you cannot bypass them. You have to figure out how to see them and reprogram them in order to be free of them, in order to be free of this factory setting that promotes negativity and jealousy and repeating dysfunctional behavior and repeating dysfunctional thought patterns and all these things. We have to be able to see all that and sit with it and reprogram something different. So there's no way to just avoid it. And probably the reason that a lot of us develop things like addiction in the first place is our efforts to avoid this. And you can't blame someone for wanting to avoid this. It's terrible. But there will come a point when you really understand that there's no other way than to sit with it and be with it and understand it, and then use your willpower, your choice, your brain to actively program other pathways on a physical, emotional, energetic level. And once you do that, then the default mode network, whilst it may still be there, it's not going to control things like your behavior, like your mood, like your sense of well-being, So as you create these new neural pathways, you actually get out from underneath this thing. So expect the resistance. You can't trust how you feel in the beginning. And the more that you get to know yourself and get to see what areas need the most work, the more autonomy and power you're going to have to change those things. So as you see these things about yourself that are difficult, know that resistance is going to come up, but then as you push through that resistance, you're going to come into a place of sovereignty and power that you didn't think was possible. So it is certainly worth it to push through that barrier. So keep that in mind. Stick to your stepping stones, stick to your goals, stick to your intervals. Okay, so even if you fail, it doesn't matter. Just keep trying, stick to these things. These things are serving as your anchor. These things that you're going to do are your anchor, and you're going to do them regardless of how you feel about it, regardless of what's going on in your life, regardless of what's going on in your partner's life, regardless of what, it doesn't matter. These things are your anchor, and you are using your willpower, your brain, your choice to align to these things. And again, while that is hard at first, it will become automatic and your life will absolutely get better, because how can it not? How can it not? So become really aware of these things, your stepping stones, your intervals. You use these things as your anchor. If you start feeling yourself drift into doubt, shame, guilt, whatever, pull it back, align to your anchor. All those feelings can be there, and you can still implement what you're doing here. You can still align to those things. So this week is about really pulling back from these things that make it challenging to adhere to what you've committed to and just doing it anyway. So we're trying to not let things like how we feel or external circumstances deter us from sticking to doing what we said we're going to do. So when we move into alignment like this does three things for us. The first thing that it does is it increases awareness of the areas in our life that we are not aligned. So these behaviors or areas of misalignment become more and more prominent and more difficult to keep acting out. Now this opening of the lens, if you will, this increase in awareness can happen really quickly for people, and it can happen more slowly at this sort of slow and steady pace for people. If it happens quickly for you, meaning you have a big shift in awareness and a big opening, which by the way can happen at any point throughout this process, really. If this happens for you very quickly, it can be very challenging because you have gone from minimal to no awareness of these areas of misalignment to like now you have all of this awareness and understanding of all of these ways that your life is misaligned, and it can be extremely overwhelming. And this happens also really frequently when we get sober, right? Because we've got this cloud cover of addiction that's keeping us sort of in this place, this cycle, this pattern, not just with ourselves, but with the people around us, all these things. And when you start to remove that, you can have this huge opening and this influx of awareness surrounding your own behavior and how it affects other people, your dynamics with other people, the relationships in your life, whether they're healthy or not, how you interact with recreational activity, all of these things. If it happens quickly, try to just focus on a few at a time areas of misalignment, because if you try to tackle all of the things that you become aware of in a short period of time, it can drown you, and you will get to them. You will get to the things. They will be there. So if you have, a big shift and a lot of these things come into clarity at the same time, you need to be extra careful with yourself and extra patient with yourself and do your best to not bite off more than you can chew, because what you're going to want to do is fix all of it at once, because it's so incredibly unbearable to be in these areas of misalignment. Just do what you can do. And you will probably go faster that way, almost undoubtedly go faster that way than if you try to do too much too soon. And for some people, you become aware of a few things at a time and you get to work on them, and then a few more things come up, and that's a much less abrasive, jarring way. And so either way is fine. There's nothing wrong with either. Either carries a similar pace at the end of the day. So, but be aware of that as being a sort of pitfall to having a more abrupt widening of the lens, or increase in awareness, as you will. So first thing this does is it increases our awareness of areas we're misaligned. The second thing that it does is it encourages the physical remodeling of your brain. So creating the stepping stones, acting on them, giving yourself gaps in use, creating clarity, all of these things are contributing to the formation of new neural pathways in your brain that once formed are not going to require energy to hold. So, and once you have a brain that is, firing correctly and working correctly, the desire to engage in these things that aren't healthy or helpful and that are damaging diminishes, and it just doesn't require nearly the amount of energy that it does in the beginning. So, by committing to these things, we are physically restructuring our brain, which is going to have impacts on every level of our existence. The other thing, the last thing that this does is it increases our self-trust. So as we talked about last week, this is a really important component. And so when you set stepping stones for yourself, or you're able to adhere to the intervals that you set for yourself, or what have you, you're able to show up for these agreements that you make, you are establishing that you are trustworthy and that you can trust yourself. And the more you do this, it's kind of like, it's like anything else. If you have, a kid that is absolutely untrustworthy. You're not going to let that kid out of your sight. But if the kid shows you over time that they do what they say they're going to do, whatever, you might let them start riding their bike around the block by themselves without, because they're going to come home or whatever. It's the same thing with yourself. So as you show up for these commitments with yourself, you can go a little bit further and further from your core, from your baseline, from your anchor, and come back, and you're going to come back. You're not going to get stuck in these things that you used to get stuck in. So this self-trust component is huge. And the way that we build that is by setting attainable stepping stones, attainable intervals, attainable changes that we can make in our lives in order to promote these behaviors and habits that lend to happiness and longevity instead of destruction and chaos. So the momentum will build with this as the neural pathways form and as you become more proficient in consistently adhering to the agreements that you make with yourself, the momentum gets larger and larger. And so then this process starts to go faster and faster, and you can start applying it to just about anything. And you also will notice that you can make changes in your physical body and in your life that perhaps you once thought were impossible to make. And once you start really understanding that, it gets to be pretty fun because there's just really nothing that's outside of your ability to change or attain for yourself. It's a place of sovereignty. It's a place of peace and well-being and happiness. And it's a place that we all have access to, but we have forgotten how to attain for ourselves. So hopefully you can start to feel those things developing as you move through the content of this week. And be patient with yourself. Be kind with yourself. Understand that this takes what it takes, and it takes, time, resilience, space, all of the things. So if you need more space, more time for this week's content, it's kind of a big bite. Please take 2 weeks, take 3 weeks, take what you need. And once you really can feel what I'm talking about in the content here, you can go ahead and proceed to week 4. But until then, take the time that you need in order to properly digest and integrate this material. It's pretty important. So have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time.